Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, watching the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean. At 42 years old, she had spent 20 years in the Navy, climbing through ranks that few women had ever reached. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. But none of that seemed to matter to the men waiting in the room behind her. She could feel their eyes on her back. She could sense their doubt. "Are we really doing this?" One voice muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "A woman commanding SEALs in combat," another whispered. "This is going to be a disaster." Sarah turned around slowly, her face calm and professional. The 50 Navy SEALs assembled in the room fell silent, but their expressions said everything. Some looked annoyed. Others looked amused. A few simply looked away, as if they couldn't even take her seriously enough to meet her eyes. These were among the most elite warriors in the world. They had fought in every corner of the globe, survived the hardest training the military could offer, and earned their place through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now they were being asked to follow a woman they'd never heard of into a dangerous mission. "Good morning, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Commander Mitchell. For the next 72 hours, I'll be your mission commander for Operation Silent Thunder." A tall SEAL in the front row, his arms crossed over his chest, let out a small laugh. His name tape read GRANGER. He was a senior chief, probably in his early 30s, with the confident swagger of someone who'd seen real combat. "With all due respect, ma'am," Granger said, his tone suggesting very little respect at all. "Most of us have been doing this for 15 years. What exactly qualifies you to lead this operation?" Sarah didn't blink. She'd expected this. She'd faced it her entire career. "Senior Chief Granger," she replied evenly. "I've spent the last 8 years in naval intelligence, planning operations just like this one. Before that, I served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I've coordinated over 40 successful SEAL missions from command centers, and I've studied enemy tactics and terrain for 2 decades. But I understand your concern. You don't know me, and trust has to be earned." She clicked a button on the remote in her hand, and a map of the Middle Eastern desert appeared on the screen behind her. "This mission is not about me proving myself to you," she continued. "It's about 60 American civilians being held hostage by a terrorist cell in northern Syria. Intelligence indicates they'll be moved or executed within 48 hours. We are their only hope." The room remained silent, but the tension didn't ease. Sarah continued her briefing, explaining the mission in detail. A terrorist group called the Red Scorpions had taken over an abandoned military compound in the Syrian desert. They were holding American aid workers, journalists, and contractors hostage, demanding ransom and the release of prisoners. The mission was complex and dangerous. The SEALs would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness, breach the compound, neutralize the terrorists, and extract the hostages. Sarah would coordinate from a mobile command center nearby, managing communications, air support, and intelligence updates. As she spoke, Sarah noticed that some of the men were actually listening now, taking notes, studying the maps. But others, including Granger, still wore expressions of skepticism. When the briefing ended, the SEALs filed out of the room in small groups, their voices low but audible. "She's never even been on a mission like this," one said. "They're making this political," another added, "trying to prove women can do everything." "Those hostages are as good as dead," a third voice said. Sarah stood alone in the briefing room, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She'd heard comments like these for 20 years, but they still stung. She'd worked twice as hard as any male officer, studied twice as long, proved herself over and over again, and still, it was never enough. Her executive officer, Lieutenant Commander James Reeves, entered the room. Reeves was a career officer in his late 40s, a man Sarah had worked with before and trusted completely. "They'll come around," Reeves said quietly, "once they see you in action." "Will they?" Sarah asked, her voice tired. "Or will they just wait for me to make one mistake so they can say they were right all along?" Reeves didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Sarah wasn't just carrying the weight of this mission. She was carrying the burden of every woman who would come after her. If she succeeded, maybe it would open doors. If she failed, those doors might close forever. The next 12 hours were a blur of final preparations. Sarah reviewed intelligence reports, checked equipment manifests, and coordinated with air support units. The SEALs went through their own pre-mission routines, checking weapons, reviewing tactics, and preparing mentally for what lay ahead. At 1800 hours, 6 hours before the mission launch, Sarah walked through the staging area where the SEALs were making final preparations. She wanted to be visible, to show confidence, to demonstrate that she was part of the team. But as she passed by a group of operators checking their gear, she overheard Senior Chief Granger talking to his men. "Listen up," Granger said in a low voice. "When we're out there, we follow the plan, but we trust our instincts. We've done this 100 times. If the commander makes a call that doesn't feel right, we adapt on the ground. We take care of each other, no matter what comes from that command center." It was subtle insubordination, the kind that wouldn't technically violate any rules but would undermine her authority when it mattered most. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. She couldn't confront him now, not hours before the mission. It would only make things worse. Instead, she continued walking, her face neutral, as if she'd heard nothing. At midnight, the mission launched. Sarah stood in the mobile command center, a converted tactical vehicle packed with communications equipment, computer screens, and satellite feeds. Around her, a small team of intelligence analysts and communications specialists monitored every aspect of the operation. On the main screen, she watched the infrared feed from a drone circling high above the target compound. 4 helicopters carrying the 50 SEALs appeared as small green blips moving across the desert terrain. "Dragon 1, this is command," Sarah spoke into her headset. "You are 20 minutes from the target. Weather is clear, no enemy radar activity detected." "Command, Dragon 1. Copy that," came the reply from the lead helicopter pilot. Sarah's heart was pounding, but her voice remained calm and professional. She'd trained for this moment, prepared for every possible scenario. Now she just had to execute. As the helicopters approached the compound, Sarah studied the intelligence updates scrolling across one of her screens. Everything looked good. The enemy appeared unaware of the approaching assault force. But something nagged at her. A detail in the latest satellite imagery that didn't quite match the reconnaissance photos from earlier in the day. "Pull up grid sector 743, she told one of her analysts. The image appeared on a side screen. Sarah leaned forward, studying it carefully. There, at the northern edge of the compound, was what looked like fresh tire tracks, vehicle tracks that hadn't been there 8 hours ago. "Dragon 1, command," Sarah said into her headset. "Be advised, we have evidence of recent vehicle activity at the northern perimeter, possible reinforcements or supply delivery." There was a pause before Granger's voice came through. He was the ground force commander. "Command, Dragon 1 actual. Noted. Will adapt as necessary." His tone was dismissive, almost irritated. Sarah felt the doubt from the briefing room come flooding back. Would he trust her intelligence, or would he ignore it because it came from her? The helicopters touched down 1/2 mile from the compound. On the screen, Sarah watched as 50 green figures moved through the darkness in perfect formation, professionals doing what they did best. They approached the compound walls. The breach teams moved into position. Everything was going according to plan. "Dragon 1, you're clear to breach," Sarah said. "Copy, command. Breaching now." Explosions lit up the infrared screen as the SEALs blew holes in the compound walls and flooded inside. For the next 8 minutes, Sarah listened to the controlled chaos of combat, voices calling out enemy positions, the rattle of gunfire. Reports of rooms cleared and hostages located. It was going well, too well. And then everything went wrong. "Command, Dragon 1, we have enemy reinforcements. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. We're taking heavy fire." Sarah's blood went cold. The tire tracks, her warning, they'd driven right into a trap. Dragon 1, how many vehicles? Sarah demanded. At least 6, armed technicals with heavy machine guns. We're pinned down, Command. We've got the hostages, but we can't get to the extraction point. Sarah's mind raced. The helicopters had already returned to the forward base to refuel, as planned. They wouldn't be back for 20 minutes. The SEALs were surrounded, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition. And every single one of them knew that she had tried to warn them. Part 2. The command center erupted into controlled chaos. Voices overlapped as analysts pulled up maps, communications specialists tried to raise air support, and intelligence officers scrambled to identify the enemy reinforcements. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her mind working faster than it ever had. 50 men were trapped because they'd dismissed her warning, because Senior Chief Granger had decided his instincts mattered more than her intelligence. But none of that mattered now. Recriminations could wait. Right now, those men needed her to save their lives. "Give me a tactical overlay," Sarah commanded. "I want every building, every piece of cover, every possible route mapped on my screen. Now." Her team moved with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, a detailed map of the compound and surrounding area appeared on the main display, with the SEALs' positions marked in blue and enemy forces in red. The situation was worse than she'd thought. The terrorists hadn't just sent reinforcements. They'd sent a well-coordinated force that had sealed off every exit route. "Dragon 1, Command," Sarah said into her headset, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Give me your status. How many wounded?" Granger's voice came through, tight with stress. "Command, we have 3 wounded, none critical. We're holding the main building with the hostages, but we're surrounded. We've got maybe 20 minutes of ammunition left at this rate." "What about the north wall breach point?" Sarah asked, studying the map. "Covered by 2 enemy technicals with 50 cal machine guns. We'd be cut down before we got 10 feet. Sarah zoomed in on the satellite imagery, her eyes scanning every detail. The compound had been a Syrian military base years ago, abandoned during the Civil War. That meant it would have been built to certain specifications, following certain patterns. "Lieutenant Reeves," she called out to her executive officer, "pull up the original construction plans for Syrian military bases from that era. They follow standardized Soviet designs." Reeves looked confused for a moment, then understood. His fingers flew across his keyboard. "Got it, pulling them up now." Sarah studied the old plans, comparing them to the current satellite imagery. There had to be something, some detail the terrorists wouldn't know about, some advantage she could give her men. And then she saw it. "Dragon 1, Command. The compound has an old drainage system. Based on Soviet military base designs, there should be a tunnel running from the main building to an exit point approximately 100 meters south. It would have been used for sewage and emergency evacuation." There was a long pause. She could imagine Granger and his men, skeptical, wondering if they could trust her. "Command, we don't see any tunnel entrance in this building," Granger replied. "It would be concealed," Sarah said. "Probably in the basement or substructure. Look for a floor grate or a covered drainage access. It would be roughly 1 meter in diameter." Another pause. Sarah held her breath. If she was wrong, she'd lose what little credibility she had left. If she was right, it might be their only chance. "Command, we've got something," a different voice called out. "There's a grate in the floor of what looks like an old storage room. It's covered with debris, but we can access it." Relief flooded through Sarah, but she didn't let it show in her voice. "Copy that, but listen carefully. If that tunnel is still intact, it's been abandoned for years. It could be collapsed, flooded, or have unstable sections. You need to send a small team through first to verify it's passable before you move the hostages." "Understood, Command," Granger said. For the first time, there was a note of respect in his voice. Sarah turned to her team. "I need that exit point identified on satellite imagery. Where would a tunnel from the main building emerge?" One of her analysts worked frantically, overlaying the old construction plans with current satellite photos. "There, grid 379. It looks like an old culvert, mostly filled with sand. If the tunnel is intact, that's where it comes out. Sarah studied the location. It was in a depression in the desert, partially shielded by the remains of an old retaining wall. But to reach it, they'd have to cross about 50 meters of open ground after emerging from the tunnel. Dragon 1, your exit point is at grid 379, Sarah said. But you'll have exposure crossing to the extraction zone. We need to give you cover. Command, our air support is still 15 minutes out, Reeves reminded her. Sarah's mind raced through options. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. The enemy was closing in, and the SEALs were running out of ammunition. They needed a distraction, something to pull the enemy's attention away from that exit point. What assets do we have available right now? Sarah asked her team. 2 Reaper drones with full missile loads, an analyst called out. They're in orbit at Angels 20. Sarah studied the map again, her tactical mind working through the problem. The drones could strike enemy positions, but the terrorists would just take cover and wait. They needed something more dramatic, something that would create chaos and confusion. What about the fuel trucks? She said suddenly. Dragon 1, when you breached the compound, did you see any fuel storage or vehicle depot? Affirmative, Command. Northeast corner. Looks like 3 or 4 fuel trucks and a storage tank. Sarah felt a cold smile cross her face. Dragon 1, here's what we're going to do. The Reapers are going to put missiles into that fuel depot. The explosion will create a massive fireball and smoke screen. While every terrorist in that compound is focused on the fire, you move your men and the hostages through the tunnel to the exit point. Our birds will be there for extraction. Command, that's danger close, Granger said. If the fire spreads, it could cut off our escape route. The wind is blowing northeast at 8 knots, Sarah said, studying the weather data on her screen. The fire will spread away from your position. You'll have a 3-minute window, maybe 4. After that, the smoke will clear and you'll be exposed again. Silence filled the radio. Sarah knew what Granger was thinking. This was a risky plan, based on calculations made by a commander who'd never been in combat on the ground, who was sitting safe in a command center miles away. But it was also their only real chance. Dragon 1, I need your decision, Sarah pressed. Your ammunition situation is critical, and the enemy is moving to assault positions. We have to act now. Finally, Granger's voice came through. All right, Command, we'll trust your call, but that tunnel better be there. It's there, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. Reapers are targeting now. Stand by for strike in 90 seconds. Sarah turned to her drone operator. Put both missiles into those fuel trucks. Maximum impact. Yes, ma'am. Birds are hot. Targeting confirmed. Sarah watched the countdown timer on her screen. 60 seconds. 50. 40. Dragon 1, we are weapons hot, she said into her headset. When those missiles hit, you move fast. Don't stop for anything. Get those hostages out. Copy, Command. We're stacked at the tunnel entrance. Hostages are prepped to move. 30 seconds. 20. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. If this went wrong, if she'd miscalculated the wind or the fire spread or the structural integrity of that tunnel, 50 SEALs and 60 hostages would die. And it would be her fault. 10 seconds. Missiles away, the drone operator called out. On the screen, Sarah watched 2 white streaks arc down from the sky. She held her breath, counting the seconds until impact. The fuel depot erupted in a massive fireball that bloomed orange and red across the infrared display. Even from miles away, through the armored walls of the command center, Sarah felt the ground shake slightly from the explosion. Dragon 1, execute, 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 Sarah called out. Moving now. Granger's voice responded. For the next 3 minutes, Sarah could only watch and listen as her plan unfolded. The SEALs moved through the tunnel, their progress marked by brief radio calls. The hostages were slower, frightened civilians being pushed and carried through a dark, narrow drainage pipe. Several were injured, 1 was elderly, 2 were children. Command, we've got a collapse in the tunnel, a voice called out. Not complete, but it's tight, we're squeezing through. Sarah's stomach clenched. Can you get everyone through? Working on it, ma'am. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly. On the satellite feed, Sarah could see the fire spreading exactly as she'd predicted, creating a wall of smoke and flame that blocked the enemy's view of the compound's southern sector. But the wind was also starting to shift. Her window was closing. Dragon 1, you have 90 seconds before smoke clears, Sarah warned. What's your status? We've got 30 personnel through, still moving the others. Too slow. They were moving too slow. Sarah made a decision. All air assets, this is command. I need immediate combat air patrol over grid 379. Authorization code Mitchell 7 Alpha 3. Light up anything that moves toward that position. Command, our extract birds aren't there yet, Reeves warned. I know, but we need to hold that position until everyone's clear. Sarah turned to her communications officer. Get those helicopters moving now. Tell them to push their engines to the limit. I don't care if they need complete overhauls afterward. Yes, ma'am. On her screen, Sarah watched as 2 Apache attack helicopters that had been orbiting nearby broke from their patrol pattern and streaked toward the extraction point. They arrived just as the first SEALs and hostages emerged from the tunnel exit. Dragon 1, you've got top cover, Sarah said. 2 Apache are holding off the enemy. Keep moving. Copy, command. We're almost out. The smoke was clearing now. On the infrared display, Sarah could see enemy fighters beginning to reposition, realizing the SEALs weren't in the main building anymore. Several vehicles started moving south, toward the extraction point. Apache lead, command. You have enemy technicals approaching from the north. Weapons free. Copy, command. Engaging now. The Apache opened fire, their chain guns ripping into the enemy vehicles. Explosions dotted the landscape as missile after missile found their targets. It was beautiful and terrible, a display of overwhelming firepower protecting vulnerable men on the ground. Last of the hostages is out, Granger called. All personnel clear of the tunnel. Extract birds are 60 seconds out, Sarah's communications officer reported. Those 60 seconds felt like an eternity. Sarah watched the screen, her jaw clenched, as the SEALs formed a defensive perimeter around the terrified hostages. The Apache continued to engage enemy positions, but more terrorists were arriving, drawn by the sound of battle. Then, finally, she heard the beautiful sound of rotor blades. Dragon 1, your ride is here, Sarah said. Mounting up now, command. On the screen, Sarah watched as 4 transport helicopters swept in low and fast. The SEALs loaded the hostages with practiced efficiency, even as enemy fire kicked up sand around them. Within 3 minutes, every American was aboard. The helicopters lifted off, the Apache providing cover as they climbed and turned west toward safety. Command, Dragon 1, Granger's voice came through, calmer now, professional. All personnel and hostages recovered. We're clear of the engagement area. Mission successful. Sarah felt her legs go weak. She steadied herself against the console, not wanting her team to see the relief flooding through her. Copy that, Dragon 1. Well done, see you at home. Around her, the command center erupted in cheers. Analysts hugged each other, communications specialists high-fived. Even the usually stoic Lieutenant Reeves was grinning. But Sarah just stood still, her eyes still on the screen, watching those helicopters disappear into the distance. 110 Americans were coming home. They'd survived against impossible odds. And she had brought them home. Part 3. The sun was rising over Coronado as the helicopters touched down at Naval Special Warfare Command. Sarah had driven back from the forward operating base through the night, arriving just minutes before the birds landed. She wanted to be there, to see her men come home, to look into their eyes and see if anything had changed. The helicopters settled onto the tarmac, their rotor wash kicking up dust and debris. The side doors slid open, and the hostages emerged first, stumbling with exhaustion and relief. Medical teams rushed forward, guiding them toward waiting ambulances. Sarah watched from a distance, her uniform rumpled from the long night, dark circles under her eyes. Then the SEALs began disembarking. 50 warriors, dusty and exhausted, their faces streaked with sweat and sand. They moved with the practiced ease of men who'd survived something terrible together, checking weapons, gathering gear, looking after each other. Senior Chief Granger was the last off his helicopter. He stepped onto the tarmac, said something to his men, then looked around until his eyes found Sarah standing near the command building. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the distance. Then, slowly, deliberately, Granger walked toward her. Sarah's heart began to pound. This was the moment of truth. Would he acknowledge what she'd done? Or would he find some way to diminish it, to protect his ego and the egos of his men? Granger stopped 3 feet away from her and stood at attention. Around them, other SEALs noticed and began to gather, forming a loose circle. The morning air was thick with tension and unspoken questions. "Commander Mitchell," Granger said, his voice formal and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Permission to speak freely." "Granted, Senior Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Granger's jaw worked for a moment, as if he was struggling to find the right words. Then he said, "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Before this mission, I doubted you. I questioned whether you had the experience and the instincts to lead us in combat. I was wrong." He paused, and Sarah saw something she'd never expected to see in his eyes. Respect. Real, genuine respect. "You saved our lives tonight," Granger continued. "You found that tunnel when we couldn't see a way out. You timed that strike perfectly. And you made decisions under pressure that brought every one of my men home alive. You're not just a good commander, ma'am. You're an exceptional one. And I'm proud to have served under your command." Then, before Sarah could respond, Granger did something that stunned her. He saluted. A sharp, crisp salute, the kind reserved for superior officers who'd truly earned their rank. Around them, the other SEALs followed suit. 50 hands came up in unison, 50 men rendering honors to a commander they doubted just 24 hours earlier. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she maintained her composure. She returned the salute, holding it for a long moment before dropping her hand. "Thank you, Senior Chief," she said quietly. "But I was just doing my job. You and your men are the ones who executed under fire. The credit belongs to all of you." "With respect, ma'am," Granger said, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "That's exactly what a good commander says, but we know the truth. You're the reason we're standing here." The formation began to break up as the SEALs dispersed to their debriefing stations, but many stopped to shake Sarah's hand or offer quiet words of thanks. Some looked embarrassed, remembering the comments they'd made before the mission. Others seemed genuinely grateful to have discovered that their doubts had been unfounded. As the crowd thinned, Lieutenant Commander Reeves approached Sarah with a tablet computer in his hand. "Commander, you're going to want to see this," he said, his expression unreadable. Sarah took the tablet and began reading. It was a secure message from Admiral Richard Kensington, the head of Naval Special Warfare Command. As she read, her expression slowly changed from curiosity to disbelief. The message congratulated her on the mission's success. It acknowledged her tactical brilliance and calm leadership under pressure. And then it informed her that she was being reassigned, effective immediately. "They're pulling me off SEAL operations," Sarah asked, her voice hollow. Reeves nodded grimly. "Sending you to a training command in Virginia. It's technically a promotion in the administrative chain, but it's a desk job," Sarah finished. "Away from combat operations, away from the action." She read further and found the reasoning buried in bureaucratic language. The mission had been too successful, too high profile. The media was already reporting on it, and the fact that a female commander had led the operation was generating significant attention. The Admiral's message suggested that this attention was distracting from the mission, and that Sarah's unique talents would be better utilized in training and development roles. In other words, she'd proven that a woman could command SEALs in combat, which made some people uncomfortable. So they were promoting her sideways, giving her a nice title and a desk where she couldn't make anyone look bad anymore. Sarah felt anger burning in her chest, but years of military discipline kept her expression neutral. When do they want me to report to Virginia? 2 weeks. They're expediting the transfer. Of course they are, Sarah said bitterly. She handed the tablet back to Reeves and walked away, needing to be alone. She found herself back at the same window where she'd stood before the briefing, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. The sun was fully up now, painting the water in shades of gold and blue. She'd spent 20 years fighting for this moment, this proof that she belonged, that women belonged in combat leadership roles. And now that she'd succeeded, they were taking it away from her. Commander Mitchell. Sarah turned to find Senior Chief Granger standing in the doorway, his expression concerned. Senior Chief, shouldn't you be in debrief? I should be, Granger admitted, but I heard about your reassignment. Word travels fast around here. Sarah tried to smile. It's fine, it's a good opportunity. With respect, ma'am, that's bullshit and we both know it. Granger stepped into the room, his usual swagger replaced with genuine concern. They're sidelining you because you made them uncomfortable, because you proved something they didn't want proven. It doesn't matter, Sarah said, turning back to the window. This is how the system works. I knew that when I signed up. Maybe, Granger said, but it's not right, and my men and I aren't going to let it stand. Sarah looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Granger's expression was determined. Ma'am, every one of those 50 SEALs knows what you did for us, and we know what's happening now. We're not going to stay silent about it. We're going to make sure people know the truth. About the mission, about your leadership, about why you're really being transferred. Senior Chief, you can't, Sarah said urgently. If you go public with criticism of the command structure, it could end your career, all of your careers. Some things are worth the risk, Granger replied simply. You put your career on the line for us. It's time we did the same for you. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. It was Admiral Kensington himself. I need to take this, she told Granger. He nodded and left the room, closing the door behind him. Sarah answered the call. Commander Mitchell. Commander, the Admiral's voice was gruff, but not unfriendly. I assume you've received my message about your reassignment. Yes, sir, I have. I wanted to call personally to explain the reasoning. What you accomplished last night was extraordinary. Your tactical decisions were flawless, and you demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need in this Navy. But the attention this mission is generating is creating political complications. Political complications, sir. Sarah kept her voice neutral. You know how it is, Commander. There are people in Congress, in the media, in our own ranks, who have strong opinions about women in combat roles. Your success has ignited debates we'd rather avoid right now. By moving you to a training position, we can let things cool down while still utilizing your talents. In other words, sir, I succeeded too publicly. There was a long pause. That's not how I would phrase it, but yes, sometimes, Commander, we have to make strategic retreats for the long-term good of the service. Sarah felt something inside her snap. For 20 years, she'd accepted the subtle discrimination, the undermining, the constant need to prove herself. She'd told herself it was all for the greater good, that by persevering, she was opening doors for the women who would come after her. But she was tired of retreating, tired of accepting injustice for the sake of not making waves. With respect, Admiral, Sarah said, her voice harder than she'd ever used with a superior officer, I disagree. I think the best way to serve the long-term good of the Navy is to show that women can lead in combat, and then keep them in those positions so they can continue to lead. What kind of message does it send if I succeed brilliantly and immediately get reassigned away from combat operations? Commander, I understand your frustration, but... Do you, sir? Do you understand what it's like to spend 20 years being the first woman in every room, being doubted at every turn, having to work twice as hard to earn half as much respect? And then, when I finally prove beyond any doubt that I belong, you pull me out of the fight. Another pause, longer this time. When the Admiral spoke again, his voice was cold. Commander Mitchell, you are dangerously close to insubordination. I'm giving you a direct order to accept this reassignment and report to Virginia in 2 weeks. Is that clear? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her entire career pressing down on her. If she refused this order, she would likely face court-martial. Her Navy career would be over. Everything she'd worked for would be destroyed. But if she accepted it, what would that say to every woman serving in the military? That you can be perfect, be brilliant, save lives, and still get pushed aside because you make people uncomfortable. "Crystal clear, sir," Sarah said finally. "Good, I expect. But I'm formally requesting a meeting with you and the Secretary of the Navy before I accept this reassignment. I believe this decision warrants a full review." The Admiral's voice turned icy. "Commander, I don't think you understand the position you're putting yourself in." "I understand perfectly, sir. I'm putting myself in a position where I fight for what's right, even if it costs me everything. Isn't that what you trained us to do?" She hung up before he could respond, her hand shaking. She'd just ended her career. She knew that. There was no way the Admiral would tolerate that level of pushback. She would be reassigned, probably to an even worse position, and her reputation would be destroyed through whisper campaigns and unofficial channels. But at least she'd gone down fighting. Part 4. The news of Sarah's confrontation with Admiral Kensington spread through Naval Special Warfare Command like wildfire. By that afternoon, everyone knew that Commander Mitchell had challenged her reassignment and was facing potential career destruction as a result. The response shocked everyone, including Sarah herself. It started with Senior Chief Granger. He gathered his SEAL team in the barracks and told them exactly what was happening. Then he made a simple proposal. They would go on record, officially, stating that Commander Mitchell was the finest mission commander they'd ever served under, and that her reassignment was a mistake that would harm the Navy's operational effectiveness. Every single SEAL signed the statement. But they didn't stop there. Granger reached out to other SEAL teams, other special operations units, anyone who'd heard about the successful mission. He explained what had happened, what was happening now, and asked for their support. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, statements of support for Commander Mitchell poured in from hundreds of special operations personnel. Some were formal letters through official channels. Others were social media posts that went viral, shared tens of thousands of times. Veterans groups picked up the story. Military reporters began investigating. The most powerful statement came from Granger himself. He gave an interview to a major news network, appearing in uniform with his face clearly visible, speaking on the record. "Commander Mitchell saved my life and the lives of my men," he told the reporter. "She did it with brilliant tactical thinking and calm leadership under extreme pressure. She's being punished for succeeding, and that's not just wrong for her. It's wrong for every woman serving in our military, and it's wrong for the military itself. We need more commanders like Sarah Mitchell, not fewer." The interview went viral. Within days, it had been viewed millions of times. News organizations ran features on Sarah's career, on the mission, on the broader issue of women in combat roles. Politicians began asking questions. Veterans groups organized rallies. Sarah watched it all with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and disbelief. She'd expected to face this fight alone. She'd never imagined that the same men who doubted her would become her fiercest advocates. But the attention also brought danger. The more public the issue became, the more entrenched the opposition grew. Conservative media outlets ran segments questioning whether women should be in combat at all. Several retired military officers wrote op-eds arguing that Sarah's success was an exception, not a rule. Anonymous sources within the Navy began spreading rumors that the mission hadn't been as successful as reported, that Sarah had actually made serious mistakes that were being covered up. The worst came from within her own ranks. One morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find a formal complaint had been filed against her. The complaint, signed by 2 officers she'd never met, alleged that she'd violated operational security by allowing the details of the mission to become public. It also questioned whether she'd properly followed engagement protocols during the operation. It was clearly a retaliatory move, designed to shift the narrative from her unjust reassignment to alleged misconduct on her part. If the charges stuck, she wouldn't just lose her combat command. She could lose her commission entirely. Lieutenant Commander Reeves found her staring at the complaint, her face pale. "It's a hit job," Reeves said immediately. "Everyone knows it. These two officers have no connection to the mission. They're clearly being used as proxies." "It doesn't matter," Sarah said quietly. "Once charges are filed, they have to be investigated. And during that investigation, I'll be suspended from duty. The media will report on the charges, not the truth. My reputation will be destroyed." "So we fight it. We get lawyers, we go public, No," Sarah's voice was firm. "I won't drag this out. I won't let this become a circus that damages the Navy and every woman serving in it. If they want me gone this badly, I'll go." "Sarah, you can't just give up." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but clear. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing my battles. I've proven what I needed to prove. 50 SEALs know the truth. Hundreds of special operations personnel have gone on record supporting me. That's more than I ever dreamed of achieving. If I keep fighting now, it just becomes about me, about one person's career. But the principle has been established. The next woman won't have to fight as hard as I did." Reeves shook his head in frustration. "That's not good enough. You deserve better." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but this was never about what I deserve. It was about opening doors for others, and I think maybe I've done that." Before Reeves could respond, there was a knock on Sarah's office door. A young petty officer stood there, looking nervous. "Ma'am, Admiral Kensington wants to see you. Immediately." Sarah stood, straightened her uniform, and followed the petty officer through the corridors of the command building. She expected to be taken to the Admiral's office, but instead, she was led to a large conference room. When the door opened, Sarah stopped in shock. The room was packed. Admiral Kensington sat at the head of the table, but he wasn't alone. Around the table sat nearly a dozen flag officers, including 2 vice admirals and the Secretary of the Navy himself. Standing along the walls were Senior Chief Granger and at least 20 other SEALs, all in dress uniform. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Kensington said, his expression unreadable. "Please take a seat." Sarah sat, her heart pounding. This was it. They were going to formally end her career, probably with all these officers and witnesses present to make it official. The Secretary of the Navy, a civilian political appointee named Michael Rogers, spoke first. He was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes. "Commander Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. Over the past 72 hours, my office has been flooded with calls, emails, and messages about you and your situation. I've heard from senators, representatives, veterans groups, active duty personnel, and approximately 2 million civilians who have strong opinions about what's happening here." Sarah said nothing, waiting for the axe to fall. Rogers continued, "I've also personally reviewed the mission records from Operation Silent Thunder. I've read the after-action reports. I've interviewed the SEALs who served under your command, and I've reviewed your entire service record, going back 20 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "Admiral Kensington recommended your reassignment based on concerns about political fallout and media attention. He was trying to protect the Navy from controversy, which I understand. But after reviewing everything, I believe his recommendation was wrong." Admiral Kensington's face remained impassive, but Sarah saw his jaw tighten. "The Navy doesn't need protection from success," Rogers said firmly. "We don't need to hide our best leaders because they challenge people's preconceptions. What we need is more commanders like you, Commander Mitchell. Leaders who think clearly under pressure, who make difficult decisions based on facts rather than assumptions, who earn the respect of their subordinates through competence and courage." Sarah felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry in front of all these officers, no matter what happened. "Therefore," Rogers continued, "I'm countermanding your reassignment. You will remain in your current position at Naval Special Warfare Command. Furthermore, I'm directing Admiral Kensington to create a new operational planning group focused on unconventional warfare scenarios. You will lead that group, with expanded authority to oversee multiple SEAL operations simultaneously." Sarah's mind reeled. This wasn't what she'd expected, not even close. However, Rogers said, his voice hardening slightly, there's the matter of these complaints that were filed against you. Allegations of operational security violations and protocol breaches. Here it comes, Sarah thought, the other shoe dropping. I've reviewed those complaints personally, Rogers said. They are without merit and appear to be retaliatory in nature. The officers who filed them will be investigated for abuse of the complaint process. The charges against you are dismissed. Around the room, Sarah saw several of the flag officers nodding in agreement. Even Admiral Kensington, though he looked uncomfortable, didn't object. Now, Rogers said, looking directly at Sarah, I want you to understand something, Commander. What happened here should never have happened. You should never have faced doubt and discrimination simply because of your gender. The fact that you've had to fight these battles, prove yourself over and over again, is a failure of this institution, not a failure of yours. He stood, and everyone in the room stood with him. On behalf of the United States Navy and the Department of Defense, I apologize. You've served with distinction, courage, and excellence. You deserve better than what we've given you. And I promise you, we're going to work every day to make sure the next woman who serves doesn't face what you've faced. Sarah stood as well, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, but I didn't do this for recognition or apologies. I did it because it was right, because the mission mattered, because those hostages and those SEALs deserved the best leadership possible, regardless of who provided it. I know, Rogers said with a slight smile. That's exactly why you're the right person for this new position. The meeting broke up shortly after, with various officers coming up to shake Sarah's hand or offer quiet congratulations. Some looked genuinely happy for her. Others seemed less enthusiastic, but accepted the political reality. Senior Chief Granger was the last to approach her. He didn't say anything, just nodded once with profound respect. Sarah nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. As she left the conference room, Lieutenant Commander Reeves was waiting in the hallway, grinning from ear to ear. I told you not to give up, he said. I was ready to, Sarah admitted. But maybe that's why it worked out. When you stop fighting for yourself and start fighting for the principle, for the mission, that's when people really see who you are. Very philosophical, Commander. Now how about we get some coffee and figure out how you're going to run this new operational planning group? Sarah smiled. How about we do that tomorrow? Right now, I think I need to go home, take a very long shower, and sleep for about 12 hours. Sounds like a plan, ma'am. As Sarah walked out of the building into the California sunshine, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Exactly, and not triumph. Something quieter but deeper. Peace. She'd fought her battle, proven her worth, and changed the system, even if just a little bit. The road ahead would still be hard. There would still be doubters, still be people who questioned whether she belonged. But now she had something she'd never had before, proof that she did belong, and a team of warriors who would back her up. That was enough. That was more than enough. Part 5. 6 months later, Commander Sarah Mitchell sat in her new office overlooking the Pacific, reviewing mission plans for 3 simultaneous SEAL operations across 2 continents. Her operational planning group had grown to 15 personnel, and they were coordinating some of the most complex missions the Navy had ever attempted. The phone on her desk rang. It was Admiral Kensington. Their relationship had been understandably strained since the incident 6 months ago, but they'd settled into a professional working arrangement. Kensington had never apologized directly, but he'd given Sarah the resources and authority she needed to do her job effectively. That was something. Commander Mitchell, she answered. Commander, I need you in my office. We have a situation. Sarah grabbed her tablet and headed down the hall. When she entered the Admiral's office, she found him with 2 other officers and a large map of Eastern Europe displayed on his wall screen. Gentlemen, Commander Mitchell, Kensington said by way of introduction, we have a developing crisis in Ukraine. 12 American contractors and 6 civilian journalists have been captured by a separatist group near the Russian border. Intelligence suggests they're being held in a fortified compound in hostile territory. Sarah studied the map, her tactical mind already working. How similar is this to the Syria operation? Very similar, one of the other officers said. Same complexity, same time pressure, maybe even more difficult because of the political sensitivities with Russia. Kensington looked at Sarah directly. The Secretary of Defense specifically requested that you command this operation. He remembers what you did 6 months ago. He wants that same leadership here. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves, but also a surge of confidence. She'd done this before. She could do it again. When do we launch? 48 hours. We're assembling a joint task force now. SEAL Team 3 will handle the ground operation. You'll have overall mission command, plus authority to coordinate with Air Force assets and CIA intelligence. Sarah nodded. I'll need to review all available intelligence immediately, and I want to speak with the ground force commander before we finalize the operational plan. Already arranged, Kensington said. He's waiting in conference room 2. Sarah headed down the hall, her mind already running through scenarios and contingencies. When she opened the conference room door, she found Senior Chief Granger standing by the window, looking out at the ocean. He turned and smiled. Heard you might need a ground force commander for something difficult. Don't you ever get tired of danger, Senior Chief? Sarah asked with a slight smile. Not when I've got a good commander watching my back, Granger replied. So, what are we getting into this time? For the next hour, they reviewed intelligence and planned the operation together, their working relationship now easy and professional. Where once there had been doubt and skepticism, now there was trust and mutual respect. As they worked, Sarah realized something profound had changed. She wasn't fighting to prove herself anymore. She wasn't carrying the burden of representing all women in the military. She was simply a commander, planning a mission with a trusted subordinate, focused on bringing Americans home safely. That night, Sarah stood on the beach near the naval base, watching the waves roll in under a full moon. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, all the obstacles and battles, all the times she'd wanted to give up but hadn't. She thought about the 50 SEALs who'd gone from doubting her to defending her, who'd risked their careers to support her cause. She thought about the Secretary of the Navy who'd had the courage to admit the institution's failures and commit to doing better. But mostly, she thought about the mission ahead and all the missions that would come after. Because that's what mattered. Not vindication or recognition or proving anything to anyone. Just the mission. Just bringing people home safely. Just doing the job she'd trained her whole life to do. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the message made her smile.